this system of mass incarceration that we find ourselves in today, where 2.4 million human beings are in cages, didn't come about by accident. If we look at it from the African-American perspective, it began on the shores of Africa. Africans, because of tribalism, were fighting one another, and this made them ripe for the type of capture and exploitation that ended up occurring. They were captured and they were imprisoned on the shores of Africa, and then they were put on prison ships, not slave ships. They didn't become slaves until they got over here, where their labor was then exploited. But they started out as prisoners, and from the looks of things today, we're right back where we started, right? Then we had the period of slavery, which was imprisonment also, because those plantations were nothing more than prisons. It wasn't like they could just come and go as they pleased. You know, they were locked into these prisons. And then, when slavery was abolished, it morphed into what we call Jim Crow. But before that, there was convict leasing. There was the sharecropping system. And then there was the segregation with Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, which made it official. So there's been always, we were brought over here, African Americans were brought over here as labor, the cheapest kind of labor you can get, you know, which is slave labor. And we were powerless. And every effort has been designed to keep us powerless. So when the plantation doors closed, the prison doors opened wide. And you see an escalating of the numbers of African Americans in prisons. Whereas before that, prisons were primarily used for white people. Yeah. But suddenly this became the new way to control these 4 million African Americans that had suddenly been emancipated as a result of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. So with every gain, there's always a pushback. And the pushback in terms of the ending of slavery was convict leasing, chain gangs, prisons, you know, and the sharecropping system, right? Any way they can find to get that labor back on the plantations, so that they can continue exploiting that labor. Well, fast forward a little bit to 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. They begin to dismantle the legal structure of Jim Crow. And then they went on with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, to completely do away with the grandfather clause, the literacy test, the poll tax, you know, and all the other, the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizens Council, and, you know, remnants of them continue to remain, but for the most part, all of that was over with. Legally, you know, on the books. But in fact, this system has always found a way to transform itself. You know, it's like I was telling, I was having a conversation earlier. This country is like a chameleon. You know, this system of oppression just keeps changing colors. But it doesn't change. You know, in South Africa, when they eliminated apartheid and the black majority came into power, there was no way that you could transform that system or come up with a version of that system to replace it with. But here in America, because whites were in the majority, they just kept changing. You know, they did away with overt discrimination, and they began to do it covertly. And this was sanctioned by the Supreme Court and every institution in this country. So what happens is we go through these periods of slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, And as we eliminated them, they found new ways to continue to control this population. And mass incarceration was the pushback against the civil rights struggle. The civil rights struggle removed all the barriers to the ballot box and, civic participation, etc. So what they did was they expanded the prison population from 300,000 in 1970 to 2.4 million today. The biggest prison population in human history. Human history. Not in the history of today or yesterday, but human history. No other nation or no other group of people have put so many human beings in cages in the history of this planet in the United States. 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisoners. We have more prisoners than China, more prisoners than Russia, South Africa, I mean, their numbers paled in comparison to ours, and that was during their apartheid period. So America has become the cage of human beings. And I'm talking about women. I ain't talking about men in prison. I ain't talking about children in prison, mentally ill in prison. I'm talking about human beings in cages. That's what we're looking at. And so the question becomes, the statistics are there, the research has been done, and we know this, right? So how do we deal with this? That becomes the dominant question. Problem, solution. And I sit here, I've been involved with the death penalty group as a result of my relationship with Lee for the last, I've been to Chicago twice. Now he got me out here in Texas.
Belly of the beast.
Yeah, the belly of the beast. And listening this morning, I'm saying to myself, the problem here is that the death penalty campaign to end the death penalty cannot operate in isolation from the problem, which is human beings in cages, right? And this whole mentality of punishment, America, all over the world, now they're talking like gangsters. Yeah, we took him out and then we dumped him in the ocean. It sounds like Al Capone or something. So this is what we got to work against, and we can only be effective if we begin to connect the dots, right? We have to build a movement, and it has to be something besides bowel movement. It has to be, what we have now is we have the death penalty. We have, okay, it looks like I'm gonna have to reassess this. All right. So what we've been trying to do to address this problem is trying to build a movement. That's what we're doing in New York, and that's what they're doing in formerly incarcerated people's movement. I was just in LA with them for 3 days, and then I was with the Drug Policy Alliance for 3 days. And what they're trying to do is connect the dots. They had people that attended that conference in LA came from 21 states and from England and Japan also. So there's a movement perking up and bubbling all over this country. It's happening in Chicago, it's happening in Georgia, it's happening everywhere. People are beginning to look at this, and they understand the need to come together, connect the dots, and build a movement that will have some results. It has to be a national movement because this is a national problem, right? And I had other things I wanted to say, but I guess they can wait until the discussion.